If you look at the standard timeline of human history, the one you see hanging in every classroom, it almost always looks like this straight line.
Yeah, the classic march of progress.
Exactly. You've got the hunchbacked ape on the far left, and he slowly stands up. He gets a little taller. He grabs a spear, learns how to farm.
Right.
Builds a pyramid, and then, he eventually ends up as a guy in a suit checking his smartphone on the far right.
And it makes it all look so inevitable.
Inevitable, yeah. Like a clean, neat march of progress from one stage to the next.
Which is probably the single most misleading graphic ever designed.
Really?
Absolutely. Because when you actually dig into the research, and specifically when you look at the visual evidence we're going through today from the Smithsonian and DK archives, that line, it isn't a line at all. Yeah. It's a messy, tangled web of accidents and climate catastrophes and just absolute flukes.
And that's really the mission for our deep dive today. We're taking this incredible source, this museum in a book, and we're trying to reverse engineer the how. We want to understand how a species that was, for all intents and purposes, scavenging for bone marrow on the African savanna. How did that species manage to pivot to building the Acropolis and, arguing about moral philosophy?
It's the biggest question there is.
It really is. And I think the place to start, maybe counterintuitively, isn't with Homo sapiens. It's with the realization that we are the anomaly.
Yes, we are the survivors. I think the big aha moment for most people when you really get into this is realizing that for the vast, vast majority of human history, the Earth was basically like Middle Earth.
Middle Earth, how do you mean?
It was populated by multiple distinct species of intelligent humans, all at the same time. You had Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, the little hobbits in Indonesia.
So the fact that we're the only ones left.
The fact that we're alone is actually really, really weird. It's the exception, not the rule.
It's kind of a Planet of the Apes scenario, except the other apes were our actual cousins.
Pretty much. And to understand why we're the ones sitting here having this conversation, we have to go way back to the very beginning. The source material highlights a creature called Sahelanthropus chidensis.
Right, and we're talking, 7 million years ago?
7 million years ago, Central Africa. This is really the starting gun for the whole story.
And what do we know about it? What did it look like?
Well, the fossils themselves are fascinating because they capture a creature that's clearly in transition. If you look at the skull, specifically where the spine attaches.
The foramen magnum.
Exactly. Its position strongly suggests they walked upright, on two legs. And that is the golden ticket for being a hominin. That's our defining trait.
I sense a butt coming.
But if you look at the rest of its physiology, the long arms, the curved fingers, they were still very much arboreal. They were spending a lot of time in the trees.
So they were hedging their bets.
They were absolutely hedging their bets. They were living in a landscape that was a mosaic. You had lakes, forests, and open savanna all mixed together, so they could walk on two legs when they need to cross a patch of open ground.
But the second a predator shows up, or night falls,
they are scrambling right back up into the canopy. They hadn't fully committed to the ground war yet.
Which makes sense. Evolution doesn't usually do these hard pivots, right? It's more of a slow drift.
It's all about trade-offs.
Yeah.
And for them, the trade-off wasn't worth it yet. But then you fast forward, a long way forward, to about 1.9 million years ago, and you get Homo erectus.
Okay, and looking at the reconstructions in the book, this is the first time you look at a hominin and say, okay, that's a person.
That's a human.
Yeah.
Homo erectus is the game changer. This is the moment we leave the trees behind for good. And the body proportions shift dramatically.
How so?
The legs get much longer, the arms get shorter. And that's not just, an aesthetic choice by nature. That is a specific adaptation for long-distance travel and, crucially, for running.
Right. This is where we get the idea of persistence hunting. The theory that we aren't faster than a gazelle, for instance, but we can outlast it.
That is our superpower. Most quadrupedal animals are sprinters. They're incredibly fast, but they overheat very quickly.
They can't sweat efficiently.
Right. And Homo erectus developed two key things that allowed them to literally run a gazelle to death. First, those long legs for an efficient loping stride. And second, and this is huge, the loss of body hair.
We basically traded our fur for a full-body radiator, for sweat glands.
Precisely. We became the most efficient cooling system on the savanna. And that meant we could run in the midday sun, when the lions were all asleep in the shade and the gazelles were at risk of overheating. It opened up a whole new niche.
But there's another physical change in Homo erectus that I found really profound, and it's a small detail. It's the eyes.
The whites of the eyes, the sclera. Yes.
What's the significance of that?
Well, if you look at a chimpanzee or a gorilla, their eyes are almost entirely dark.
Yeah.
You can't easily tell where they're looking. It's a bit of a poker face. But Homo erectus, and subsequently us, we developed this visible white sclera around the iris. Now, this seems like a tiny cosmetic detail, but for social coordination, it is enormous.
It's a piece of signaling technology. If I can see the whites of your eyes, I know exactly what you're looking at.
It's called joint attention. Imagine we're hunting together and we can't speak, or we don't want to make noise. I can catch your eye and just glance over toward a bush, and you instantly know there's something important in that bush.
So it allows for silent, complex cooperation that other primates they can't pull off as easily.
Exactly. It strongly suggests that Homo erectus was living in these highly cooperative, socially complex groups, which makes sense because they needed to be.
And they were fueling those complex brains and that running lifestyle with something new, cooked food.
The control of fire.
Yeah.
This is the technological leap that actually alters our biology. Think about it. A raw piece of meat takes hours to chew and digest. Your body expends a ton of energy just breaking it down.
It's basically outsourcing digestion. We used fire as an external stomach.
That's the perfect way to put it. Cooking pre-digests the food for you. So a quick steak is like high-octane fuel that hits your system almost immediately with less effort.
Which meant our own internal stomachs, our guts, could get smaller over time.
Yes, and the massive energy savings from having a smaller gut could be redirected somewhere else.
To the most expensive organ we have.
To the brain. You simply don't get philosophy without fire. You don't get complex thought without that massive increase in available energy.
So Homo erectus spreads out. They're incredibly successful. They dominate the planet for a very long time. But then we get to that family reunion you mentioned. The source material lays out this incredible map of coexistence. You've got Neanderthals evolving in Europe and the Middle East. You've got the Denisovans in Asia, the so-called hobbits, Homo floresiensis, on an island in Indonesia, and then there's us, sapiens, emerging in Africa.
And for a very long time, the academic narrative was, it was very warlike. It was called the replacement theory.
Which is based...
The idea was that sapiens came out of Africa, we were smarter, we were more aggressive, maybe we had better weapons, and we just wiped everyone else out.
A prehistoric total war.
A total war, a genocide. But the DNA revolution of the last, say, 20 years has completely changed that story.
Because we can now read the story in our own genes.
We know now it wasn't just war. In many cases, it was a merger. We interbred.
Which is just wild to consider. It means that, in a way, none of those other humans are truly extinct. They live on inside of us.
Exactly. If you are of European or Asian descent, you are walking around with, on average, about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA right now.
And does that DNA do anything?
Oh, absolutely. It seems to affect our immune systems, our skin's reaction to sunlight, maybe even our propensity for certain allergies or diseases. We didn't just replace them, we absorbed them. We took the parts of their genome that were useful for surviving in those new environments.
We did eventually become the only game in town. The Neanderthals, for example, had bigger brains than us on average.
They did.
They were physically stronger. They were much better adapted to the cold of Ice Age Europe. So why did we win the demographic war? Why are we here and they're not?
That's the million-dollar question. And the leading theory circles back to that social complexity we talked about with the eyes. The evidence we have suggests that Neanderthals lived in very small, isolated pockets, maybe a family group of 20 or 30 individuals.
And they didn't network much beyond that.
Their world seems to have been quite small. Whereas Homo sapiens, we seem to have had some kind of software update that allowed for the creation of much larger social networks.
The source material mentions the hyoid bone, which is the bone in the throat that anchors the tongue.
Right.
And both us and Neanderthals had it. So physically, they could speak. They can make the same range of sounds we can.
They had the hardware for speech, no question. But we likely use the software of language differently. We probably used it to gossip, to trade information about resources that were miles away, to create myths and stories.
To create social bonds with people you're not directly related to.
Yes. To build tribes out of multiple family groups. So when a hard winter hits, or the caribou migration fails, a Neanderthal group is pretty much on its own.
A sapiens group could call on allies from over the next ridge, or move to a territory they heard about from a distant cousin they met at a seasonal gathering.
Network effects win every time. It's the difference between a standalone computer and the internet.
That is a perfect analogy. And that connectivity, that network, is what allowed us to move. We tend to think of the Out of Africa event as this arduous march across a barren desert.
Like a single heroic journey.
Yeah. But the climate data tells a really different story, doesn't it? There was a green Sahara period.
It's called the African humid period, or the pump theory. For thousands of years, the Sahara wasn't a desert. It was a landscape of grasslands and vast lakes, teeming with wildlife.
That wasn't a barrier.
It was a corridor. It was a paradise.
Mm-hmm.
And it drew populations north, out of sub-Saharan Africa. Then, when the climate shifted back and the desert returned, it effectively pumped those populations out into the Middle East and the wider world.
And they just kept going. I mean, reaching Australia 50,000 years ago is the one that just blows my mind.
This is astonishing.
That required crossing stretches of open ocean. You couldn't see the land you were going to, just open horizon. And they built some kind of craft and they went anyway.
The level of planning and bravery and trust that requires is just incredible. And then you have the other extreme, adapting to the Ice Age steps of Europe and Asia.
Right. And this is where we see the toolkit of the mind really explode. You mentioned the needle earlier when we were prepping for this.
The bone needle.
It seems so mundane. It's just a tiny sliver of bone with a hole poked in it.
But think about the cognitive leap required to invent that. And think what it allows you to do. Before the needle, you're just draping an animal's skin over your shoulder. It's clumsy, it's drafty.
With a needle and some sinew for thread.
You are tailoring. You are creating fitted garments. You can make pants. You can make parkas with hoods that trap air. You can make waterproof boots. You're creating a personal microclimate around your body.
It's what allows a tropical ape from Africa to hunt woolly mammoths in Siberia.
That little bone needle is as significant as the steam engine in terms of unlocking new environments for humans to conquer. It's a revolution.
And they weren't just surviving in these harsh environments. They were expressing themselves. The art from this period is just stunning. The Lascaux caves, the mammoth ivory flutes.
That's the final proof that they were us. They had abstract thought, they had ritual, they appreciated beauty, they had free time, or at least they prioritized making art over just, getting the next meal they were imagining.
So we've done it. By about 12,000 years ago, we've colonized the entire globe. We are master hunters, we are artists, we are the undisputed top predator, and then in a few places around the world, we make the single most consequential decision in our history. We stop moving. The agricultural revolution.
Or, as some anthropologists and historians have called it, the worst mistake in the history of the human race.
I love this perspective because it completely inverts the narrative we all got in our high school textbooks. Hunter-gatherer, primitive and brutish, and farmer, civilized and advanced.
Right. Because if you actually look at the skeletal evidence, the transition to farming was, for the average individual human body, a complete disaster.
How can we tell?
The skeletons of hunter-gatherers are generally tall. They have excellent teeth, strong bones. They ate a hugely varied diet of dozens, if not hundreds, of different plants and animals.
And the early farmers?
They shrank. They were several inches shorter. Their bones show evidence of anemia and nutritional deficiencies. Their teeth are full of cavities and abscesses from all the sugar in the grain-heavy diet. And their spines. Their spines are often deformed from the repetitive motion of grinding wheat on stone querns for 10 hours a day.
So why on earth would they do it? Why would you trade what sounds like a pretty good life, maybe a 20-hour work week hunting and gathering, for a 60-hour work week of back-breaking labor in a field?
It's what's known as the luxury trap. It probably started innocently. You're a hunter-gatherer group, you camp for a few weeks near a field of wild wheat because it's a reliable food source.
Mm-hmm.
Then you notice that if you drop some seeds on the ground, you get even more wheat next year. So you stay a little longer. It's a bit more food, a bit more security.
And more food means you can support a slightly larger population. You have more kids.
Exactly. But now that you have more kids, you need more food. You are dependent on that wheat field. You can't just go back to hunting and gathering because the local wild game can't support your now larger population.
So you're locked in.
You're completely locked in. And it's a feedback loop. More food leads to more people, which requires even more food. You could almost say the wheat domesticated us.
That's a great way to put it. From a biological perspective, wheat just wants to spread its DNA. By getting humans to clear forests, provide water, and protect it from pests, wheat became one of the most successful plants on Earth. We work for the wheat.
And this new density of people, all living in one place, creates a completely new kind of living arrangement. Which brings us to a place like Sakalhuyuk in modern-day Turkey. This town is just baffling.
It's one of the earliest cities we've found.
One of the earliest large settlements, yeah. We're talking 7,400 BCE. And if you can picture it, it's a town with 0 streets.
No streets?
None. The mud brick houses are all built wall to wall, just mashed together into one giant honeycomb or pueblo.
So how do you get home at the end of the day?
You walk on the roofs. The roof was the street. It was the public square, the plaza, the playground. You'd visit your neighbors by walking across their roof, and then you'd enter your own house through a trapdoor in the ceiling and climb down a ladder.
That sounds incredibly defensible, for one thing.
It was a fortress, absolutely. But it also shows a profound psychological shift. These people were willing to live right on top of each other, literally. The concept of privacy, as we would understand it, just didn't exist.
And inside those homes, we start to see something new.
We see property, heavy grinding stones, large ceramic pots for storing grain, weaving looms. These are all things you can't just pack up and carry with you if you're a nomad. We started accumulating stuff.
But this brings up a huge chicken and egg question. Did we settle down and start farming, and then that stability allowed us to build temples and develop religion? Or did the temples come first? Did religion force us to settle down?
And for a long time, the answer was obviously agriculture first.
But the source material brings up Göbekli Tepe, which seems to just break that standard timeline completely.
Göbekli Tepe is the smoking gun that suggests we have had the sequence completely wrong for decades. This is a massive, sophisticated complex of T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons. They're arranged in circles, and they are intricately carved with animals, lions, scorpions, vultures, foxes.
And crucially, there's no city nearby, no evidence of anyone living there permanently.
No city, no houses, no farms. And the carbon dating is unambiguous. It was built around 9500 BCE. It was built by hunter-gatherers.
So people, nomads, were coming together from all over the region to build this massive religious site before they had agriculture.
That is the staggering implication. The desire for the spiritual, for ritual, for a massive social gathering, that came first. But think about the logistics. You can't feed 1,000 people who are gathering for a month-long construction project just by hunting the local rabbits and gazelles. You'd strip the area bare in a week.
You need a surplus. You need a reliable, storable food source.
So maybe, just maybe, they started cultivating wild grasses in order to support the temple.
So religion was the engine of civilization, not just a later byproduct of it.
It's a powerful argument.
Yeah.
The idea, the shared fiction of the temple, is what mobilized the labor and forced the economic innovation of farming.
Okay, so once we have the full package farming, settlement, and organized religion, it starts to spread. And it really hits the accelerator in one particular place, Mesopotamia, the land between the 2 rivers.
The Fertile Crescent. But again, we have to talk about geography here, because in the ancient world, geography is destiny. Mesopotamia is incredibly fertile, that's true, but it is dead flat.
It's a bowling alley for armies.
It's a shooting gallery. It's completely defenseless. There are no mountains, no major deserts to protect you, just wide open plains.
Yeah.
And that geography created a culture of, well, paranoia and hyperaggression.
Because you always knew the next invasion could be just over the horizon.
Exactly. And if you look at the history of the region, it's just this constant, brutal churn. The Sumerians, then the Akkadians conquer them, then the Babylonians, then the Assyrians. One group rises, builds cities, and then the next group comes along, burns them to the ground, and starts over.
But that constant pressure, that competitive environment, it also forced them to innovate at an incredible pace.
It was an arms race. If you want to survive in a place like that, you need high walls, you need a strong army, you need complex organization, and you need better technology than your neighbor.
And they gave us what you could call the urban kit, the foundational technologies of city life.
The wheel, not just for transport, but the potter's wheel for mass-producing ceramics. They invented systematic irrigation, building canals and dikes to control the rivers, and crucially, they invented bronze.
Why is bronze such a massive leap over stone? I mean, obviously it's metal, but there's a whole supply chain aspect to it, isn't there?
It's huge. Stone, you can just find on the ground anywhere. But bronze is an alloy. You need to mix copper and tin. Now, copper is relatively common. Tin is rare. Very rare.
So to make bronze in Mesopotamia, where they had neither copper nor tin,
they had to import it. They had to create long-distance trade routes to get tin from places as far away as modern-day Afghanistan, or maybe even Cornwall in Britain eventually.
So the moment you have a single bronze axe, you're implying the existence of a global economy.
You're implying trade routes, merchant classes, contracts, protection for those trade routes, and to manage all of that complexity, you need to be able to write it down.
Which brings us to cuneiform.
The world's first true writing system. And it's so telling what they used it for. It wasn't for writing epic poetry or love songs.
It was for accountants.
It was for bureaucrats and accountants. The earliest tablets are all receipts and ledgers. Ur-Nammu delivered 5 bushels of barley. He is owed 2 shekels of silver.
It's fascinating that writing this thing we now treat as so sacred and literary really just started as a spreadsheet.
It was a tool of control,
Yeah.
of power.
Yeah.
You can record debt, if you can record laws, if you can send precise orders to a general 100 miles away, you can build an empire.
And the empires they built were something else. The Assyrians, in particular, seem like they took that culture of paranoia and turned it into state policy. The source material has these terrifying carved reliefs of King Ashurbanipal.
The lion hunter.
Right. He's shown in his chariot or even on foot, killing lions with a spear, sometimes looking like he's doing it with his bare hands.
And this wasn't just him saying, hey, I'm a tough guy.
Yeah.
It was deep symbolic propaganda. In Mesopotamian mythology, the wilderness, the wild, represented chaos. The king represented order. The city was order. So by publicly killing the lion, the most powerful symbol of chaos,
He was demonstrating that he was physically maintaining the cosmic order against the forces of chaos.
I can handle the lion, so I can definitely handle you if you don't pay your taxes. Violence and terror were the currencies of the Assyrian state. They were masters of psychological warfare. They wanted you to be so terrified that you wouldn't even think about rebelling.
Okay, so now compare that constant anxiety, that flat, war-torn, unpredictable landscape of Mesopotamia to ancient Egypt. It's the polar opposite.
It is a totally different vibe. If Mesopotamia is a product of its insecurity, Egypt is a product of its security. It is a natural fortress.
How so?
You have the Nile River in the middle, which is the most reliable, predictable machine in the entire ancient world. It floods at almost the same time every year. It dumps a fresh layer of incredibly fertile silt, and then it recedes, perfectly timed for planting.
And on both sides of that narrow green strip.
You have thousands of miles of the most deadly desert on the planet, the Sahara to the west, the Eastern Desert to the east.
So nobody can easily invade you?
It's very, very difficult. And this geographical isolation created a civilization that was incredibly stable, deeply conservative, and fundamentally optimistic. They believed the universe was orderly and just. They had a word for it, ma'at.
Which means something like balance.
Balance, truth, justice, cosmic order. The pharaoh's main job was to maintain ma'at. And that stability, that confidence in the order of things, it allowed them to think really, really big. Which brings us to the Old Kingdom, the Pyramid Age.
The scale of the pyramids is still hard to comprehend. But what's interesting is how our understanding of how they were built has shifted. We used to have this image from movies of
thousands of slaves being whipped by cruel overseers.
Right. But the archaeology of the workers' villages at Giza tells a completely different story.
Very different story. These were not slaves. These were skilled laborers and conscripted farmers. And they ate well. The bone dumps show they were eating a lot of beef, which was a luxury, plus fish, bread, and they were given a massive ration of beer every day.
So it was a state-run project.
There were medical clinics to set broken bones. These were citizens paying their labor tax to the state during the flood season, the Aket, when they couldn't work in their own fields anyway. It was a massive national project, a unification engine.
A kind of make Egypt great again by stacking enormous rocks.
In a way, yes. It bound the people of Upper and Lower Egypt to the pharaoh who was their living god, the bridge between the earthly realm and the divine.
But it's interesting, you look at the timeline, and after a few hundred years, they stop building giant pyramids.
They do. In the New Kingdom, they stopped completely.
Because they were just giant, flashing billboards for grave robbers.
They were screaming, "Here is all the gold in the kingdom, please come and steal it." And they did. Almost every pyramid was robbed in antiquity. So the theology, or at least the burial practice, shifted. They moved to the Valley of the Kings.
Hidden tombs, dug into the sides of cliffs, underground.
Exactly. And the focus of the religion also seems to shift a bit, away from the solar cults of Ra, represented by the pyramid reaching to the sky, and more towards the underworld cults of Osiris.
Speaking of the New Kingdom, we have to talk about Ramesses II. Ramesses the Great. This guy is the ultimate example of fake it till you make it.
The Ozymandias figure. He is just larger than life. He ruled for 66 years. He apparently had red hair, which is very unusual. He lived to be over 90 when he died. But his greatest talent, by far, was public relations.
Case in point, the Battle of Kadesh.
The signature event of his reign. He fights a massive battle against the Hittite Empire in what is now Syria. And by all objective accounts, It was a mess. It was probably a draw, maybe even a strategic loss for the Egyptians. Ramesses himself was almost captured.
But that's not how he told the story back home.
Not at all. He goes home and covers every single temple wall in Egypt with these enormous carvings of him, single-handedly, like a superhero, smashing the entire Hittite army. He spins a chaotic stalemate into a glorious, divinely ordained personal victory.
And then there's his temple at Abu Simbel, the one that was carved directly into a mountain. The lighting trick there is just showmanship on a completely different level.
It is pure genius. The entire temple is oriented with such astronomical precision that twice a year, on his birthday and on his coronation day, the rising sun shoots a single beam of light 200 feet into the dark heart of the mountain.
And it illuminates the statues in the inner sanctuary.
Yes, but not all of them. This is the truly brilliant part. There are 4 gods seated on thrones in that sanctuary. You have Ramesses himself, deified as a god. You have the great gods Amun and Ra, and you have Ptah.
And Ptah is?
Ptah is the god of craftsmen, but also a god of the underworld. He's associated with darkness. And the sunbeam hits the first 3 statues, setting them ablaze with light, and stops just before it touches Ptah. He remains in eternal darkness.
That is some Steven Spielberg-level directing right there.
It shows their absolute mastery of astronomy, engineering, and architecture, all in the service of the ego of the king.
So you have these 2 massive, powerful, centralized river valley civilizations, Mesopotamia and Egypt. And then you go north, across the Mediterranean, and you hit Greece. And once again, the landscape creates a completely different kind of human, a different kind of society.
If Egypt's geography is about unity and stability, Greece's is about fragmentation and competition. It's a land shattered into 1,000 pieces. It's all steep mountains, isolated valleys, and tiny islands.
So you can't easily march a big army from one end of the country to the other.
It's almost impossible. And because of that, you don't get a single massive unified empire like Egypt. You get hundreds of small, independent city-states, the polis, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes.
And they were fiercely independent.
Fiercely, they were rivals. They were constantly at war with each other. But this fragmentation, this competition, is actually what allowed for the incredible explosion of thought. In Egypt, you do what the pharaoh says. In Greece, Athens tries democracy, Sparta tries a military oligarchy, Corinth tries tyranny. It was a giant laboratory of political science.
Let's unpack Athens for a minute. We throw the word democracy around, but they had some specific mechanisms that we would find very, very strange today. Ostracism, for example.
Ostracism was their safety valve. We think of elections as a process of voting people in. Ostracism was a process for voting people out.
How did it work?
Once a year, the Citizens' Assembly in Athens would ask a simple question. Is anyone getting too dangerous? Too ambitious? Is anyone a potential threat to the democracy?
And if the answer was yes, they'd hold a vote. And if at least 6,000 people scratched your name onto a broken piece of pottery, an ostracon...
You were banished, exiled from the city for 10 years. No trial, no charges. It was a preemptive strike against tyranny. They were deeply, deeply terrified of one person hijacking the system. It's a reminder that democracy is fragile and it requires constant, active maintenance.
And it was this environment of debate and public argument that fostered the great switch from mythos to logos, the birth of philosophy.
This is often called the Greek miracle. Instead of just saying Zeus was angry, so he threw a lightning bolt, people like Thales and Anaximander started asking, wait, what is lightning? What is it made of? What are the natural causes for these natural phenomena?
And they applied that same rational inquiry to human behavior and society.
Absolutely. You get Socrates wandering the marketplace, just asking questions. What is justice? What is virtue? And then you get Greek theater, which wasn't just entertainment. It was a public therapy session.
How so?
Tragedies, like Sophocles' Antigone, forced the entire citizen body to sit together in these massive, acoustically perfect amphitheaters and confront the most difficult moral questions imaginable. What do you do when the law of the state conflicts with the law of the gods? They work through their civic trauma collectively.
But the city-states, as you said, they couldn't play nice forever. They exhausted themselves fighting each other in the Peloponnesian War, which opened the door for an outsider, for Alexander.
The Macedonian takeover. Alexander the Great is the pivot point for the entire ancient world. He takes the military machine his father built, he conquers Greece, and then he just keeps going. He conquers the entire Persian Empire.
But his real legacy isn't the battles, it's what came after. It's the cultural blender he created, the Hellenistic age.
He absolutely forced East and West to merge. He founded Greek-style cities in Egypt and Afghanistan. He encouraged his soldiers to marry Persian women. Suddenly, you start seeing these incredible cultural fusions, like statues of the Buddha sculpted in the style of a Greek god wearing a toga. It's called the Gandhara style.
He created a single cosmopolitan world where ideas, goods, and people could flow all the way from India to Athens for the first time.
A connected world.
And speaking of a connected world, we have to look at the connectors themselves. Section 6 of our source material focuses on the people who didn't necessarily build the biggest pyramids or the grandest temples, but who built the networks. And you have to start with the Phoenicians.
The unsung heroes of ancient history. They were based in what is now Lebanon, in cities like Tyre and Sidon. And they were, first and foremost, merchant princes. They didn't want to conquer you, they just wanted to sell you stuff.
And to sell stuff efficiently across a wide network, they invented the ultimate business tool, the alphabet.
The importance of this cannot be overstated. Before the Phoenicians, if you wanted to read and write, say, cuneiform or Egyptian hieroglyphics, you had to memorize thousands of complex symbols. It took years of specialized training.
Which meant literacy was confined to a tiny class of professional scribes.
It kept power locked in the hands of a tiny elite. The Phoenicians were pragmatic sailors and merchants. They needed something quick and dirty for their business dealings.
They didn't have time to draw a perfect picture of a bird just to represent the sound A.
Exactly. So they stripped it all down to its bare essentials. 22 simple symbols, each representing a single consonant sound. It was revolutionary.
It was a democratization of literacy.
It broke the scribal monopoly on information. A regular person, a merchant, a sailor, could learn this system in a few weeks. And because they were sailing everywhere, from Britain to the coast of Africa, they spread this amazing technology with them.
The Greeks adopted it, famously added vowels, and boom, we get the basis for the tool we're using to record this deep dive right now.
It's one of the most important inventions in human history.
And the other great connector of this era was the Persian Empire. We usually see them through the very narrow lens of the Greeks, the movie 300, they're the bad guys.
The faceless oriental hordes.
Right. But the source material paints a picture of a really sophisticated, innovative, and surprisingly tolerant administration.
The Persians were the first to realize that you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. The Assyrians before them had tried to rule by pure terror, and their empire was brittle and constantly in revolt.
The Persians tried a different approach.
Under their founder, Cyrus the Great, they developed a policy of multicultural tolerance. He basically said, I don't care who you worship, I don't care what language you speak at home, just pay your tribute, keep the peace, and don't revolt.
That's how the Jews who were exiled in Babylon got to go back home to Jerusalem.
Cyrus actually funded the rebuilding of their temple in Jerusalem. He figured correctly that happy, prosperous subjects are much easier and more profitable to rule than terrified, resentful ones.
And they built the infrastructure to manage this vast, diverse empire.
The Royal Road. It was a highway system with rest stops and fresh horses, which allowed a message to travel 1,500 miles from one end of the empire to the other in about a week, which was just unheard of. They were the masters of logistics.
But even the best logistics in the world can't always stop a disruptor. And the ultimate disruptors in the ancient world were the people on the fringes, the so-called barbarians.
The nomads, the people off the map. In Europe, this meant the Celts, and on the Great Plains of Eurasia, it meant the horse tribes of the steppe.
Barbarian is such a loaded word. It was a Greek term, right?
Yeah, it just means someone who doesn't speak Greek. To a Greek ear, other languages just sounded like bar, bar, bar. But these people, like the Celts, were far from primitive. They had incredibly sophisticated metalwork, the Latin culture. They built massive hill forts. They had a complex social structure with druids and warriors.
And they were terrifying to the civilized world. In 390 BCE, they actually sacked Rome.
It did. This is the famous story of the sacred geese of Juno.
Right.
The Romans were defeated in a battle, and they're holed up on the Capitoline Hill, their last defensive position. The Celts try a surprise attack at night, scaling the cliffs. The dogs don't hear them. The Roman guards are all asleep.
The geese.
But the sacred geese in the Temple of Juno start honking and flapping their wings like crazy, and they wake up the garrison.
Combat geese saved the Roman Republic.
It's a classic story, but it shows how close Rome came to being wiped off the map before it even really got started.
And then in the east, you have the steppe nomads, the Scythians, and later the Huns.
The horse lords.
What made them such a potent military force?
They mastered the horse in a way that settled agricultural peoples never had. essentially lived in the saddle. And they perfected the composite bow, which was small enough to be used from horseback, but incredibly powerful.
So they could ride at full gallop and shoot a volley of arrows with deadly accuracy.
It was the ultimate mobile artillery, and this created a fundamental military imbalance that drove much of Eurasian history for the next 2,000 years. The mobile, fast-striking nomad could always threaten the wealthy but stationary city. It's the great tension that runs through history.
So we've spent millions of years here. I mean, we've gone from the very first nervous, upright steps of Sahelanthropus all the way to the sprawling, interconnected trade networks of the Persians and Phoenicians. When you step back and look at this entire stack of research, does a single, clear pattern emerge for you?
The pattern that always strikes me is fragility. We look back at these empires, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Persians, the Romans, and they look like these solid, eternal monoliths. They look inevitable. But to the people living inside them, they felt just as permanent and indestructible as our own world feels to us today. And yet, every single one of them fell.
The Bronze Age collapse is maybe the scariest example of that. Around 1177 BCE, you have this period where basically every major civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean just ends.
It just comes apart, all at once, within a few decades. The great empires of the Hittites and Mycenaean Greece vanish. Egypt is severely weakened, major cities are burned to the ground, trade routes completely collapse, literacy even vanishes in some places for hundreds of years.
A dark age.
A total systems collapse. And we're still not entirely sure why. It was probably a perfect storm of climate change, migrations, and internal rebellions. But it's a stark reminder that civilization isn't a default state of being. It's a complex, high-maintenance machine.
And if you pull out a few key gears, things like climate stability, reliable trade networks, internal social trust, the whole thing can grind to a halt shockingly fast.
It's a very sobering thought. We sit here as the beneficiaries of 7 million years of struggle and invention and just dumb luck. But we are not immune to the fundamental rules of history.
We're just the latest chapter in the book.
That's all we are. And if the historical and archaeological timeline teaches us anything, it's that chapter's end. Which raises the question, what are we building today that will actually last? When the archaeologists of the year 7000 dig up the ruins of our cities, what will they find? What will our story be?
Hopefully not just a compressed layer of plastic and some lingering radioactive isotopes.
Let's hope for something a little more inspiring than that. Maybe our bone needles and our stone hand axes will be our digital archives, our art, our science, if they can still decode them.
A lot to think about. This has been a massive, massive journey through time. Thanks for helping us unpack it all.
My pleasure. It's always good to step back and look at the big picture.
And to everyone listening, keep asking how. Don't just settle for the names and the dates. Always look for the mechanism, the reason why. We'll see you on the next deep dive.